We are on with a D9 native and baseball lifer. Jim and I, before we started this recording, probably we could have gone longer than we needed to before we actually started talking about some even better content. I'm sure it'll be Jim Pransky, Eldred, Pennsylvania native, and we'll have him explain where he's from. But he's an author of a book that I really highly recommend, and I'm going to put it up here now. Baseball's Test of Spirit, a man's unlikely odyssey into the scouting world. And that's exactly what he did. He was a coach. Jim, great to have you on the show. You're in Davenport, Iowa, maybe huddling under some storm clouds, but great to have you on the show. Let's talk some baseball. What do you think?
That sounds good, Rich. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So Eldred Township, you are a Otto-Eldred grad?
Otto-Eldred grad, 1973.
Okay.
Tell
me where you learned, where'd you get the passion for baseball, Jim? And your career is impressive. Obviously you're in Iowa now. You're not doing what you have been in past. We'll get to what you're doing now, because you're not done with baseball by the sounds of it. What's your earliest memories of playing baseball?
I think probably playing catch with my brother. My brother was 9 years older than I was, but he was a great older brother. He always, took me with him on trips, which was really cool for me. He was driving at 16 or 17. I was just a little guy riding with my brother in his Malibu, but playing wiffle ball in the backyard. And I think it was probably watching my brother play baseball and basketball growing up, and then my mom had pictures of me, with a bat at 3 and 4 years old. We had a big backyard. So wiffle balls and baseballs and pitchbacks and a basketball court. And it was just a great place to grow up. Just in our backyard was great. So no, I just picked it up that way. And I was really lucky with our town. And there were a group of kids in town that were very much like me. I mean, we just played ball. I mean, that's what we did. If whatever the season was, we just played, and we played all the time. And I think back home, that's because there's so many small towns, Eldred's surrounded by them, and the Potter McKean Little League and of course the basketball conferences and football conferences, border conference and football and all of those, but all the towns were pretty much the same. And I think kids in the area grow up like that. You just grow up with a bunch of buddies, and you just play. You're just playing all the time. And I don't think I grew up any differently than most kids who were interested in just playing sports.
You mentioned your mother, who was a classmate of a very famous pirate, for those who are deep pirate fans,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be Don Hoak. Tell me a little bit about what she told you about roulette native Don Hoak. Bob
Yes.
Hoak. Don Hoak, yeah.
Don, Mom went to school at Rowlett High School. She grew up just miles from Rowlett, and so did my dad. And I do remember this as a youngster, that we would talk about baseball. She was a big baseball fan, and she would bring up Don. Don was probably the first big leaguer that I really knew much about, because my mom talked about him a lot. And she said she would tell me that at Rowlett and probably that Port Allegany Countersport area, she said there were a lot of players, but no one had the determination that Don Hoak had. And she would say determination. Every conversation would have the word determination when she talked about Don, and she was proven right. Don from his high school days straight through the minors and into the big leagues, and 2 World Series championships, and just a wonderful baseball career. So but the Rowlett thing, I just heard that a lot, and actually Mom and Dad would tell a story that Don actually stopped at their house one day in Eldred, and he was coming back maybe from Olean or someplace. Don made the professional baseball from a tryout camp in Olean.
Wow.
And was, as soon as he came back from World War II, he went to the tryout camp, was signed there, and then just took off from there. So it's an amazing story, and that 2 Rowlett natives not only made the big leagues, but have World Series rings, with Josh Kinney being the other guy. So
And we're going to get to Josh Kinney. That's a tremendous story. One of your favorites. I don't know if it is your favorite, but it has to be up there. Jim, you went to college. You always had your passion for baseball, and you went to Clarion.
I went
And
to
I believe you might have tried out for the team or something there. But you were not giving up on baseball as a career, even though you had a teaching background, I believe.
yes,
Um,
yes.
Tell your story. I mean, you ended up going to Florida. Actually, I might get the timeline wrong because you were a college coach at Bonaventure. You're a Bonaventure, St. Bonaventure, George Washington, and Quincy. Give me a little bit of time. Give us a little bit of a timeline on how you just kind of turned this into a lifelong profession.
Well, really, it goes back to high school, and I love, playing. I like most of us, back home, we played, football and basketball and American Legion baseball or Babe Ruth baseball, depending upon our age. And just whatever season it was, we played. And there was a group of 10 or 12 of us that just always did that. And things were I never thought about a career, but I just thought, oh, I'm just going to play forever. You don't think about the future that much. But I broke my leg in football at the beginning of my junior year at Otto, and unfortunately that set me back a whole year, and I missed the sports. I missed all basketball, most of baseball. I didn't have a lot of mobility for a while, so but it really was an eye opener. I mean, it really eventually created an opportunity and made me realize. It took me a while, instead of just being mad about it, but it took me a while to realize just how great it was to have played, and then to work myself back. And that wasn't easy, but eventually it got back to the point where when I was in my 20s, 26, 27, I was probably a better athlete than I was when I was 16. But
Right.
Unfortunately, I wasn't in high school anymore. So, but no, it really was that, and you just never, the interest was always there. The interest was always there, and I just took a different route. It just took in a lot of scouts for organizations usually come from maybe a stronger playing background than I was. They're either good college players, or played a year or two in the minors, or played in the big leagues, some even. So there's no really blueprint to becoming a scout. It's really, guys have different backgrounds, and it just, instead of, there's a lot of different ways. I guess my point is there's a lot of different ways of getting there. And when I was 18, I never thought about scouting. I did think about coaching, and that's where I really started. And coaching and teaching in schools, actually teaching in schools really helped me in scouting, because the relationships that you have with kids and parents, having the opportunity to talk to them as you do with parents when you're negotiating a contract or trying to get information about kids, because background and information about kids is very important, in signing players and drafting players and so on. It's more than just, how does this breaking ball move, or what's he light up the radar gun at, and what's he run a 60 in. I mean, all those are important, but you have to kind of put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And I thought teaching really helped, and that's where I thought I didn't have the advantage that some of the guys had with the great, knowing so many professional people when they started, was the big asset. But I thought I had the advantage in that I was a teacher, and I thought, working with people and kids from all different, shapes and sizes and backgrounds. I thought that was a big advantage for me, because I knew how important backgrounds were. with kids, how they developed both academically and how they developed, as a potential baseball player. So I really enjoyed that, and it took me a while because I was a little intimidated, at first, because I'd be standing next to, some big leaguer that was scouting, but yeah, I found out that those guys were great, and I learned a lot from them. I just really, those first couple of years, I found the veteran scouts, and I just stood behind them, and I kept my mouth shut, and I just listened, and I learned a lot that way. I just learned a lot. So
that's awesome. So I'm going to read. This is in your book at the beginning, and I'm going to spell this out because then I'm going to ask you. What it's amazing how much anecdotes. But anyhow, I'll go. Jim Pransky, professional baseball scout for 25 years. He worked for 5 organizations: Houston, Oakland, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay, Colorado. He was Scout of the Year with the Athletics in 2001. Was a member of the Oakland scouting staff in 2002. The well-known and controversial Moneyball draft. The Eldred, PA native, was also with Tampa Bay when the Rays represented the American League in the 2008 World Series. And you obviously were a tremendous note taker, because this book doesn't happen if you don't have notes. Mm-hmm. Explain your project on getting this book out, because it's over a long period of time. How challenging was it to put a book together that you feel that people would be interested in, which I was?
Well, thank you. And it was really a task that I really enjoyed. I mean, and I had thought about it for years, but I was fortunate. I never kept a diary in scouting, but I kept maybe a little journal or a little pad that I kept in my back pocket. And it wasn't all about what was going on in the field, but sometimes I'd hear something in the stands, just something clever or funny, and I just jot it down, and I did that for 25 years.
That sounds like a reporter, like I am.
Yeah, I just really just kind of took notes on it, and fortunately, I had a good memory for sports. I wish I had that well academically, but it was good, and it really was just information compiled through the years, and some of the things I think working for several different teams helped a lot too, because I got to see, I had different roles with different clubs. So I got to see, different parts of the country, and I covered all of Canada for a couple summers. So I went from Vancouver all the way to Prince Edward Island across the country. And it was just a great learning experience. And and working for 5 clubs, some people I think might think that I couldn't keep a steady job, but that's pretty normal that guys move because general managers move sometimes, or the opportunities arise someplace and at another place. Sometimes it's because of children that you want to be closer to home, when your kids get ready to play. And so you want to work with a club where you can end up there. So I was living I was living in here in the Midwest. And my first job was, I lived in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And because I signed with the Astros, they wanted me to work the Northeast and Canada in the summertime. And so I was living in Champaign, Illinois, my wife and I just took an apartment in Carlisle, PA, and just worked from there and took the turnpike over and over and over and worked there. And it was great. I mean, it worked out well. I missed being home, but that was part of what we had to do at that time. So we did that, and it just led to 25 years of it.
I get a kick out of your story. You were first trying to get in at Florida, basically into scouting. You had already, tell me this, I believe you had already done the college coaching at that point, or is that later?
No, it would be, and I could see where you'd have that question, because I even have that question where I was at times. I just never stayed in one place very long, and the only reason I could do that was I had freedom's not really the right term, but I did not have the responsibilities that a lot of people have when they're in their 20s. I wasn't married then,
Right.
and or have kids or things. So I had that opportunity to move to places, and so I went to Florida. I went to Florida once, and I went back again 4 or 5 years later.
Right.
I was in Florida, and then got the head coaching job at St. Bonaventure. So I moved back to the Northeast,
Right.
and then I left Bonas and went to George Washington, and which was a great experience. I worked with a great guy, John Castleberry, and John was at GW for a long time. But then we both became baseball scouts at the same time. And then we both retired from scouting at the same time. And
Wow.
John and I still, talk via the internet and things. And he's a great guy. But after GW, I went back to Florida again. So it was some bouncing around. And then I'm in Florida and moved to Quincy, Illinois. So it just. If somebody looked at it, my mom and dad questioned my sanity at times. Like, what are you doing? You have a good job, or you had a good position here, or you're teaching, but now you're doing baseball, and you're in baseball, now you're teaching, and like I said, I think they wondered, is this what my son's going to do his entire life? And I kind of did, for a long time. So. It worked out well.
Well, hats off to the journey. That's for sure. That's something that really sparked my interest, and we could go many different directions. But I want to name drop, especially the D9 natives that you came across.
Sure.
And we went through a short list before we started recording. But the one that I feel that I think it's a big part of D9 baseball history is a guy by the name of Jim Pittsley. A first-round draft pick of the Kansas City Royals in 92. In fact, coincidentally, the Beavers are back in the state finals tomorrow for the first time. For the first time since Pittsley, they have a Yukon and a Delaware recruit on the team. So no surprise they're playing for a state title. But that was a 92, and I felt that once Pittsley got the attention for the area, or for he got the attention, it seemed like a lot of kids from that point on were able to get recognized. Joe Bime was another one. He spent time on my podcast a couple times. Great interview. But you were at one of the maybe first times that a lot of scouts showed up to watch a 6'7" right-hander from DuBois. Give me some of that, because that's a hilarious story.
Well, the Jim Pittsley was actually the first free agent game I ever scouted, and in DuBois, which isn't that far from Eldred at the time, but or still is, but
right.
Jim was a name that you always have a preseason list of names, and somebody has passed this along to you, or the scouting bureau has come up with reports that, hey, this is a guy to look at, for this year's draft. But with Jim, the first thing I remember is just his pure size. I mean, you walked in and he was 6'7". You're interested, and a loose body guy, and so on. And since it was the first high school game of the year for DuBois, there were scouts all over the place. There were, 15 to 20 guys just, waiting like we always do, waiting for, for the teams to hit the field, and then talking among ourselves. And scouting as opposed to 50 years ago, was much more open, I think, when I started. In other words, guys shared information more, and they didn't share their reports or share what exactly they thought. But if someone said, if you asked directions, or where is DuBois, somebody would beside you, scout could say, well, you just have to do this, and you're there. We didn't have the internet and things going that strongly then, but I do remember with Jim and standing behind the backstop, and everybody had their radar gun out and ready to go. And, guys getting ready to get to different angles so you could see his arm action and different things that you would check. And then all of a sudden, here comes a I'm going to say it's school administrator, because I don't know his exact role, but I think he was, a principal or a vice principal at the time. And he just said, guys, I'm going to have to ask you to move. And Jimmy Pittsley was already on the mound taking his warm-ups, and we've got everything lined up. And especially some of the older guys, they they were not happy. And they were not diplomatic about their not moving, and it didn't turn into any confrontational thing. It was just really.
This is how it works when big kids are on the mound.
Right. I mean, guys are going to show, and they're going to be in places. And when you have a player like that, and most schools, if you took all the schools, most high school kids or high school coaches don't have a player like him, don't have a potential first-round draft pick. I mean, you may have good players that become college players, or even, drafts somewhere down the line. But he was, I can remember after we got everything settled, and basically the principal or vice principal was very accommodating, after everybody had their point of why, because he
Right.
they just weren't used to that, and scouts weren't used to being told where to go. They're just going to set up behind home plate, and he accommodated everybody. He just said, okay, but only for a couple of innings. Well, that's all you really need. You probably only need a couple of pitches to know that Jimmy Pittsley was really good. But it worked out fine. But it was kind of a baptism for me, in that, well, here's scouting, and the first high school game you're doing, they're telling you to get out of there. Is a whole career going to be like that?
Right.
But the interesting thing was my supervisor saw Jim Pittsley's next start and his second start. So my supervisor's there, and back then we used a voice genesis on. We didn't talk directly on the phone much, but we had a 1-800 number, and that's the way that we worked through the organization. And I can remember Jerry Kraft was my supervisor, and was a great guy, just a wonderful guy to introduce me to scouting, really. And but I can remember the first thing he said on his voice message, and this is going out to the entire Astros organization. He said, I just got back, and I just saw our first rounder today. And and we actually had the first pick in the country that year, and he wanted Pittsley number one in the country. That's where
1-1. You had the 1-1 pick.
That's where Jerry wanted him, and that's the way he had him listed. And I like Jimmy a lot too, but again, when you're with that, when you have that first pick overall, I wasn't ready to pull the trigger that quickly, but Jerry was adamant. And this is back in probably second game of the high school season. I mean,
you projected him. I think your book, you were still first round, but
right, number one. I just didn't think in the organization was, and I didn't know this at the time, but the organization was just strongly committed to drafting a college guy. And with that first pick, and that was Phil Nevin, who was at Cal State Fullerton, and it was like College Player of the Year, and was in the College World Series, and well-known third baseman, power guy, and so on. And the couple interesting things about that draft, 1992 was Derek Jeter's draft year.
Yes,
and so Jeter never came. I don't want to say he wasn't discussed in our meetings, but only discussed in the sense that we're not going to take this guy. It wasn't a question about was he a good player or not, but we just weren't going to take a high school guy. And I don't know if our guys saw him as a number one anyway, but the
redraft of that draft, he would be 1-1.
Right. And the funny thing, that the story that I heard, and I know the gentleman pretty well, that the area guy for the Yankees, and the Yankees had a little question about if they were going to draft him because there was a strong feeling that Jeter was going to go to Michigan, that he had signed with Michigan and he was a Michigan kid. And there was a lot of talk that he was going to do that. And even the Yankees were just concerned. It wasn't that they were sitting back on him. And at their meeting, when it was time for their area scout to talk after he had been listening to them talk about going to Michigan and so on, he said he's not going to Michigan. The only place this kid's going is Cooperstown. And he was right.
There you go.
And I've often thought, and you can do this with every draft, and you can second guess and third guess and all the way down the line. But if the Astros had taken Jeter, and if he would have signed, which I think he signed for more than I think he was the 8th overall pick, and more than what that pick normally would get. But it's Derek Jeter, so that's okay. But I think we would have had Bagwell at first, and Biggio at second, and Caminiti at third, and Jeter at short. That's a pretty good infield.
Yeah, that's a few Hall of Famers in there, man.
Yeah, that's a pretty good infield, and you can do that with certain guys, and probably every draft you can look back and just say, boy, just one, if we could have done this over, and so on. And that's what makes, guys told me right from the beginning, draft, it's not an exact science, and it's not. You put the pieces of the puzzle together, you try to fill all of it in, you think you've got it, and then all of a sudden it doesn't turn out the way that you wanted it to for different reasons. And
absolutely. Ironically, you mentioned Phil Nevin. Jim and Nevin met at the mound in a little more contentious situation years later. Nevin charged the mound, and Pittsley,
Pittsley, really,
with DuBois' wrestling tradition under him, which I don't think he wrestled. He was a basketball player other than he did a double underhook, took him to the ground, and it was a nasty between the Angels and the Royals. That would have been what was going on, and it was not pretty. And if you and I'll tell if you get on YouTube and search for Jim Pittsley and Phil Nevin, you will definitely find that.
I would love to see that. I did not know that. I did not know that story.
The draft science and going back and recollecting is endless fascination. I mean, the inexact science, as you mentioned, and just weighing what the guys may or may not do on money, on signing, is fascinating. But let's get to another D9 native, which is probably it's like you said, it's out of the movies. Josh Kinney, Port Allegany native, who has a World Series ring. But that doesn't happen if what doesn't happen, Jim? You were very much close to Josh at Quincy. Tell the Josh Kinney story as quickly or as concise as you can get. But he's story.
I will preface it by saying I actually think of all my years of scouting and all the stories I've heard, and I don't think there's a better baseball story than Josh Kinney. How he got there, and then what he did after he got there. But just that Josh Kinney ended up in the big leagues, just the big leagues, even if it was for one day, is just an unbelievable part for him to have survived all the things that you need to do to get to the big leagues. But it really, with Josh, it started at Quincy, and I knew Quincy well because of having coached there, and my assistant coach was a New York State area guy from Andover, Pat Atwell. So Pat and I knew each other from playing alley cat baseball back in the East. So Pat was coaching at Josh at Quincy, and I knew Pat, I knew Quincy well, and I knew Kinney from Port Allegany, and having played Little League in Rowlett, He was a little leaguer at Rowlett. And in fact, going back to Don Hoak, when I first talked to Josh, he said that he had won the Don Hoak Award as the top little leaguer in Rowlett, and he got a little plaque. But he said, I didn't know who Don Hoak was, and which is not unusual for a 10-year-old not to trace big leaguers all the way back. But no, Josh had an outstanding college career, a Division II at Quincy, and just helped build their program along the way, and but was not really on anybody's draft list. He was a right-hander, probably 5'9", and kind of stocky built kid without an overpowering pitch. His best pitch really was a slider, fastball probably 86, 87, which again is and a very good college pitcher. I mean, knew how to pitch and so on, but you didn't see as a future professional. Maybe as a organizational filler type guy, and that's what I thought Josh was. I thought he could pitch professionally, but probably as a filler. One or 2 years, in the minors in A ball, and that would be it. And I think almost everyone saw that. So Josh was completed his college career and was ready to come back to Pennsylvania, and I think he wanted to be like a guide or something, like a hunter guide or a fishing guide or something. Wow. He loved the outdoors, and he just wanted to be. I know he told me that his first year in Quincy, he hated staying in the dorms because they kept the windows down, and he couldn't hear the crickets. Wow. And he was so used of growing up in Port Allegany or in that McKean County or Potter County that he had to hear the crickets and stuff. So that was a big thing for him. Wow. Was not hearing the crickets, but he was ready to go back home, and he had finished his career. He drove up to say goodbye to his coach, Pat Atwell, and he said, Pat, thanks for everything, and I'm on my way home. And they asked Pat. Pat said, well, Josh, why don't you stick around and try to make an independent league team, down in the St. Louis area, and you just play independent ball, and then you could tell your folks and maybe your kids someday that you played a little bit of pro ball, and you made $1 or $2 playing pro ball, and Josh said, oh, okay. His car was packed. He was ready to drive back to Pennsylvania, the long trip, but he did the Frontier thing for a couple games, and the Cardinals were having trouble signing their drafts. So they were just real light on organizational pitchers to fill a role, and they just didn't have them at that time. So the call basically came out to the scouts that, hey, just find us a couple guys that can throw A ball, for a year. And the area guy in Quincy said, well, I got a guy, Josh Kinney. So they gave, and Josh always said he signed for a pork rib sandwich. That was it. They took him out for a dinner, and now I'm sure there might have been $100 contract or something, but he had never had like that type of sandwich before, and he was just excited about having a sandwich. So, but then I saw Josh pitch he got up to the Midwest League, which was pretty good, which was farther than I ever thought he would get. And I saw him pitch in relief, and I saw the Cardinals whole staff through 4 games of minor league ball. So I saw 12 guys. And when I got done, I had Kinney slotted maybe in the 6th or 7th spot of their team. And I called Pat Atwell, his former college coach, and I said, Pat, Kinney's doing okay. I said, I think he could play another, probably play another year or two, and it seemed like every year I was doing that, I think he can play another year, and he can play another year. And then he's in AA, and then he's in AAA. And then before you know it, he gets the call to come up to the big league club. And it's just amazing that this young man, I mean, everybody had him targeted. In fact, I can remember bringing his name up at our draft meeting, and you have the scouting director at one table, and everybody else is there, and he's listening to all the names. And we got down to the end, and he said, "Okay, I need a pitcher, somewhere in A ball." And he said, "Does anybody have anybody?" And just raise your hand. And I raised my hand. I said, there's this kid from back home. His name's Josh Kinney. He said he'd be a great filler. And, I said, he's playing in the Frontier League now, but he could be, you could sign him from there and go right into professional baseball. And so I did my 90-second talk about him. And my scouting director looked at me and said, "Jimmy, I think we'll just let him keep throwing in the Frontier League," meaning that we really don't have any interest in him. And I think about him saying, my scouting director was really a great guy and a great scout. Just wonderful. But, wow. He just, and he wasn't wrong. Because I think we all thought that, but and then Josh comes and next thing you know, he makes it, and he's in the World Series, and he's just, and he has a great, he's a factor in the World Series. Yeah. He was a middle guy and threw some great eighth inning setup guy, and just was great. And before you know it, he's got a World Series ring, and it's just an unbelievable story because it just, and he never changed. I would see Josh at spring training, and he'd find me, I'd be around the fence or something. He'd see me and he'd come over, and we'd talk about Pennsylvania and hunting. That's what he wanted to talk about, but it was like talking to, if I went into Eldred right now, it'd be just like talking, like we do, we talk our hometowns, we talk our areas, and we love that, we still do. I haven't lived in Eldred for a long time, but right. I still, stay in touch with people and love to get back. And it's just a great area. That whole district area there is just all those teams, and have done so well. If you really, I've never stopped, looking at names of guys, and just, and even, the guys that are, made it in pro football, and the guys that made it in baseball and other sports. It's a great, it's really great to keep following them, and that, and it always will, I just always will. And we've talked before we got started about some of the schools and, right. and winning state championships and specific players. So it's just fun.
Best player that you scouted that actually was as good as you thought, who would that be?
Oh gosh. That's a great question. You should have warmed me up to this one.
Well, okay, we'll go. I'll start with this one because I know you admitted in the book the best player you didn't think was going to be much of a major leaguer, and I'll answer that, and you can tell me your story because it's a fascinating, and I think you know where I'm going. Yeah. Albert Pujols.
Albert Pujols, right? Albert.
You Pujols. Saw him in high school.
I saw him in high school. And I saw him in where I saw him primarily. Because this is when he was signed out of junior college. He was at a junior college and in Missouri, and most of our area scouts when I was working the Midwest come from, they work. We usually work like a 6-state region, So right. If you worked Iowa, you usually had Illinois and Wisconsin and Missouri and maybe a couple of other states. So I remember seeing Pujols for the first time in Iowa, and he was playing at a junior college at Iowa, and that's where a lot of the scouts that live in Chicago came down to Iowa to see him rather than go all the way out to Missouri to see him. And he played in a doubleheader, and there were probably, I would say, estimate there were 15 scouts there, and in a doubleheader. By the time we got to the third at bat in the first game, probably 10 of those guys had left already. They had no interest. No interest. Now, if you ask some of them today, they had interest. Right. But I was there. I know guys left. I saw them leave. Wow. And of course, when he turns out to be obviously a Hall of Famer and everything, that But he wasn't. He was the first thing that I can remember. The coach introduced us before the game because he was getting some attention, but and guy, it wasn't that he was a secret at all. And I can remember the coach introduced, and I shook his hand, and I looked at him, and I thought, well, this kid's not 19 years old. He's 22, 23 years old. He had a full beard,
Right.
and
Very
he just looked older, and but very very polite and just a really nice kid. But he was playing shortstop, and he played. I tell guys he was about a hamburger short of weighing 250. I mean, he was 6'2", and it was not a good weight at that time. I mean, he was not severely overweight, but he was carrying a lot of weight. And at shortstop, he certainly had an arm. He had arm strength, but range and mobility and so on. He was not going to be a shortstop, which we all knew. It was going to be a bat that would have to play, and he just. When I saw him, he didn't show that. I mean,
that's amazing.
I put him down. I put him down as in our number range. I gave him a 47, and a 48 in our organization. I was with Oakland at that time. A 48 means that you want him cross-checked by a supervisor. You want somebody to come in and see him. So I played the middle ground. I kind of liked him a little, but I don't think I want my supervisor to come all the way in from Oakland or someplace. So I gave him that 47 number, which I don't want to say it was kind of covering up, but it was just, I had some interest. And when we went to the draft meetings, and we're probably in the third day, and at the third night, I had already talked about Pujols, and in the draft meetings you have boards like chalkboards, and they go around the room, and you have like the first rounders are here, and then it just goes to the right. And
who are you working for again?
I was working with Oakland. With Oakland then, and so every day as a scout, you come in and check the board to see if your guy moved, see if the scouting director or somebody moved him to another board, either higher or lower. Well, I talked about Pujols and gave him my thoughts and thought he was a 47, and certainly had some interest, but didn't think he was a top round draft pick. So the next day I come in, and Pujols was over in the kind of fell in between like the 8th to 12th round, is where I had him. Certainly would take him then, but that's where I had him in the 8th to 12th round. Well, I come in the next day and I look at the 8th to 12th board, and he's not there. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he jumped boards. He went the other way. So I started looking at the 13th round and over. I don't see his name. And I'm thinking, well, they forgot Pujols. They forgot to put him on there. And then I looked the other direction, and there he was under the second rounders. And I thought, gee, who moved him over there? And what happened was I had a little video that my own personal video that I took at games, my own camera. The organization didn't give us cameras or anything, or we had to do it. I just kind of did it myself.
Right.
And I took some shots of Pujols hitting, and I had told my scouting director, who always stayed late, while everybody else left, and he was going to watch tapes and do other things and work all around the clock. And he watched that tape, and he saw something that I didn't see.
No kidding.
He saw, and he had moved Pujols over, and now we weren't going to take him in the first round, but we would have taken him, and I mean, I know Grady Fuson was my scouting director. He was not going to let Fuson go by. I mean, I know that, but he liked him a lot better than I did, and a lot better than a lot of people did. But there were guys that there was a guy that, ironically, Tampa Bay actually had Pujols into the stadium to work him out before the draft in front of all the scouts, and only one guy thought he was a first rounder, and everybody else just didn't have a lot of interest in him. And now he turns into, the next year I saw him in his first year of pro ball in the Midwest League, and he was like an entirely different player. I mean, it sounds it sounds weird, but he really was. I mean,
13th round draft pick is what he ended up with
13th
the
round,
Cardinals.
and the next year he just tore up the Midwest League. I mean, he's hitting shots. They moved him to, I think he played both first and third, but he was going to be a first baseman, I think, and as he advanced, I think that was a given. But the bat was just tremendous. I mean, he wore out the Midwest League.
Yeah, I'll quote those stats: 324, 65 extra base hits in 109 games. I think that would define as tearing it up.
And so quickly, he, at the end of the season, and I think I'm correct, he goes to AAA, and he plays the last few games at AAA. He goes to spring training, and he makes the big league club.
Yeah,
he makes the big league club when less than 2 years before, most guys didn't even think he should be a draft.
I mean, he had 194 hits, missed one game, and had 91 extra base hits. And as you know, 100 is like the magic number. Right. Very few players anymore even come close to that. Right. He has 91 as a 21-year-old rookie with 133 games in the minors.
Yeah. And it was just, people have asked, and everybody asked about, well, why'd you miss Pujols? And I think that was a chapter in my book about how did you miss Pujols? Well, I have to say, well, everybody could say that they missed him, and as far as the selecting and then draft, but I don't think, it's with Albert. I just think that he really, in fact, I think his first name is Jose, but and I think he was maybe Jose Alberto Pujols, but in the big leagues, of course, he was Albert Pujols. But I think he and I've seen players like this where they have really, their goal has always been to be a big leaguer, and as with so many guys, but that's really their thought pattern. And so the other they'll do whatever it takes to get there. But once they can get in the pro ball, and things change so dramatically once you get in the pro ball. I mean, because that's what you do for a living. There's no classes that you go to.
Right.
There's no long. Well, you still have to take some bus rides in the minors, but there's just you're not. That's not your job in college. I mean, you still have other roles that, from academically, and still things going on. But in pro ball, you're getting not only the instruction, but also I think as soon as he signed, he knew that he was on the route. And so he did all the right things because the talent was there. I mean, it wasn't that he just, it was magical. I mean, it was always there, but he just refined everything to the highest number. And
that's an awesome story. It just shows you how that might be one of the best examples of you just don't know. And you said the guy, your scouting director caught something and moved them up on the board, and it didn't matter. The A's didn't get him. You mentioned the Oakland A's, and of course the Moneyball era, which you were right in the middle of, and we've got to end the podcast with something on Moneyball. And I don't know if somebody played you in the movie, like somebody sitting in the back row or whatever. I don't know if you ever pinpointed which guy might have been you. But as you said, you were a scout. You were obviously lower on the hierarchy. You saw all this going on. I always felt what was underrated about the success of the A's was not necessarily their Moneyball, but three guys by the name of Barry Zito, Mark Mulder, and Tim Hudson, because that's not a bad staff to wind your success around. Fascinating years with the A's, right, Jim? I mean, how would you sum up that in the famous draft? And I know you mentioned the disappointment was the stereotype of the scouts, which wasn't exactly true. Is that where your biggest hang up was kind of there?
Yeah, well, with the movie, Michael Lewis, who wrote the book, Michael was there for our draft meetings, and I met him, and every scout met him. I shook hands and introduced ourselves, and I'm Michael Lewis, and so on. He never, at least with me, he never told me he was writing a book. I thought he was a columnist for like
Right.
the Oakland Tribune or something, and which is not unusual to have, newspaper people there or
I
media
think it would
people
be
out.
fascinating to be a fly on the wall at those. My buddies, my other baseball nuts, would just it's fascinating to hear those stories that we're talking about. But anyhow, he's in there with you guys.
Yeah, he's in there, but I don't know that he's, I knew nothing about a book at all. And I even after the meetings and after the draft and everything, I didn't know anything about the book. And I was back home. I came back home to Iowa, and it was the off season, and I'm walking through a bookstore and I see a Sports Illustrated on a rack, and the upper headline said A's and surprises a Moneyball draft or something. I said, well, I don't know what this is, but I knew our draft was a lot different than ever, but Moneyball was not a term then that anybody used. It was just it turned into much more of a statistical. We were playing, the numbers were a big part of it. On base percentage was a huge part of, offensive categories, but the Moneyball thing I didn't know. And then I started reading. Sports Illustrated had a couple excerpts from the book. Right. And when I read those excerpts, I said, and I'll use the terminology, wow. I said something else, but I say, wow, wait till this comes out, because, it's pretty rough on some individuals, and Billy had said some things that would make some other GMs upset. I mean, I just knew that was going to happen. I think we all knew that was going to happen, but it was, Billy Beane's belief, and he was, really strong in this statistics and analytics and so on. But it wasn't like it is today. For us, it was really that on base percentage was big. I mean, it was really big and was a big part of it. Plus Billy was very direct. What made it a giant issue was our scouting director and Billy were on different paths, and that's what made it, and that's what I guess I can say this now because it's many years later. But my scouting director was a great guy. Grady was great, and Billy and I enjoyed Billy. Billy was really a good baseball guy and very intelligent, and had been a previous first round draft pick as a player, and understood the game. And years later, I see Billy at spring training and, can always say hello. And so I liked both guys a lot, but they were definitely on different paths. Sure. And it reached a point where when we were at the meetings that we knew that it was going to crash. I mean, something was going to have to give here, because you couldn't have a draft with them going completely different directions. And what happened was, back then, you had a call for the draft, and it went out among all the clubs, and it would come from the commissioner's office, and it would say, Toronto, are you there? Just making sure all the phone lines were hooked up, and you went through all the clubs and make sure everybody was there. Then you would say, Toronto has the first pick. Toronto, you're on, and then it would just start from there. Well, when right before all the phones were hooked up and ready to go, I heard this noise, and and I looked to the front table, and I don't know if I put this in the book or not. I might have. I don't know if I did or not, but it's the truth. I mean, what happened? Billy stood up, and I couldn't hear what he was saying, but you could kind of tell his face was red, and that he was having a very heated discussion with Grady. And the discussion really was who we were picking, who we were going to pick because we had multiple picks that year, and which made Moneyball a little different too, because we had so many picks, in those early rounds. Well, Billy stood up, and after the conversation got real heated, he stood up, took his folding chair, and threw it up on the wall. And all the scouts are there. There's media people there. Some of the office personnel, it always came down for the first pick of the draft and so on. And Billy threw the chair up on the wall and left. He just left, and he was gone. So I'm sitting there, and we're all looking at each other, and I'm thinking we're going to have to pass on the first round because our general manager just left. But Grady sat there and just continued and went on with the draft, and that was, we just went through the pieces and did it. But we knew that eventually down the line that after the draft, and things would have to change for the following year. And the next year, our scouting director was gone. Our area scout was gone. Our national cross checker was gone. They all took different jobs, and I don't think it was a firing thing at all. I just think personalities clash, and we weren't on the same wavelength, and that's it. It created a lot of things. And our draft was, you can look at the draft because we had so many picks, and some of the picks we took Nick Swisher in the first round, and Nick turned out to be a good major league player.
Yeah,
a good major league player. And we took Joe Blanton with our second pick, and Joe turned out to be a good major league pitcher.
Yep.
Neither one Hall of Famers or that type of a player, but we're good. Any team in the country would have taken those guys somewhere in the draft. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But it was quite an experience. I mean, it was just a very heated, and you could see how, guys were competing just like you do on the field. They were really competing, and this is the first time it was so visible. How much they were competing, and you just happened to be there. I'm sitting in the back just waiting for the draft, and you waiting for your players to get picked or not picked, and so on. And Oakland did a little differently than some clubs too, in that they bring all the scouts out for the entire draft. So we were there like 4 days before, and then we were there through the entire draft. So we were in Oakland for 6 or 7 days straight. So, and when I started with clubs, with a couple clubs, we didn't go to the site. They did everything over the phone, and the supervisors may have met in Houston, but we didn't. At all times. We did one time, I think, when I was there, but other than that, we didn't do that. And so the whole Oakland thing about being there was just that was very good. And I thought that was I thought everybody should do that. I thought it was tremendous advantage to just have everybody there and free to say what you wanted to say, and with proper respect to everybody. And I don't think it was a true loss of respect in any sense. I think it was just heated, just like the field gets heated or the basketball court gets heated at times, and it does. You're competing. You're competing, and but we were kind of competing from within. That made it a little bit different.
Right. Jim, great story. There's several more in the book. I'm going to put the title of the book up again. It's Baseball's Test of Spirit, A Man's Unlikely Odyssey into the Scouting World by Jim Pransky. You have several anecdotes. You highlight players that you scouted through the book as well. This book's obviously available on Amazon. That's probably the easiest place to go find it, or any bookseller. I read it on Kindle. I was able to take notes, and I just was fascinated with all the thoughts, because this is stuff that baseball junkies will like. And I know I have people that I know that would really enjoy it. Jim, what are you doing now? Because you have something scheduled this afternoon. You're still involved in baseball.
Yeah, I used to own a baseball facility that I ran during the off season. It was just an instructional school. I would have basically ages, 8 to 18, and I would hire guys with good baseball backgrounds in the area where I lived, and at that time still in Iowa, and a lot of times guys, some pro guys that had during their off season, because being an indoor facility, we of course used warehouses or things that would allow for us to have our machines in and netting and all that. And so once we found a place that would, where we had enough room for everything, and then we just set it up, and we went 7 days a week, and it was the off season, and working with kids, and it was great. And then and the kids loved it because some of their instructors were minor league guys that were home for the winter, and it was just neat. And those guys were really great instructors too. They loved being with the kids, and it was a no pressure situation, and it was just. And I got started with that, and we had our own business for a long time. And then when I went into pro work, it was just impossible to keep the business. But I sold it to one of my coaches, and it's still going on today, and it was really neat, and I really loved it. But now I'm back working for another guy for a couple days a week, and much less time than I used to spend. And I'm quite a bit older than I used to be there. So I stay away from a lot of BP. The 200 BP throws have now been reduced to about 6, I think. That's about it. But no, it's really enjoyable here in the area, and it's a good way to meet people too. Because all those years that have lived in Iowa, and I just wasn't home. I was working out east a lot, and I'd get home for Easter and maybe make another trip home. And that was about it for a long time. That was our life. And, but then things, as I got more experience and as my jobs changed and stuff, and then we always tried to gear it so I got more time at home or close to home. And I got to scout the Midwest for a long time, which made it, really much easier. I could commute sometimes. I could go to some towns close to us, and I could get home for, to sleep in my own bed and have breakfast at home and so on. And that worked out, that was nice, but still had some travel, and now I'm home all the time. Now I don't go anywhere except to the instructional facility, and my wife and I go out to dinner, and that's about it. That's as much as I get out now, but still, it was a great career, and I really enjoy it. And thanks for the accolades here. I really appreciate. But I'm still I'm an Eldred kid. I still am. I always will be. But it's nice out here. I mean, I enjoy the Midwest, and we don't have any hills though. That's different. I mean, that's flat. That's different, but it's still a nice area, and we have a minor league team. A team high. The Royals High A club is just 2 miles down the road, so that's nice. That's nice too. But it's been the instructional. I love doing the instruction. You just always. I don't think you ever lose that coaching part. You still want to. You still want to coach. I don't second guess when I see somebody on TV or, they should do this or do that. But I think, and some of the things when I watch a big league game and I see, how catchers set up now. Well, we never thought about that or ever. Right. Why would you just, sit down, on one leg? Who does that? I remember Manny Sanguillen did it. I mean, back in the 70s would do it back then, but nobody did it on a regular basis. And how the game is, I don't think the game has changed as much as just, life and our culture has changed that with coming up with clocks, and tailoring the stadiums differently now. And the artificial turf age is over. When it used to be, I can remember scouting games and Veterans Stadium and Three Rivers or Busch Stadium. And if you had your eyes shut and then opened them, sometimes you'd forget where you were because they stadiums all look the same. Or many of them look the same. Not Fenway, of course, or Yankee Stadium, but now it's it's much more stream. You don't have any of those stadiums that have the 480 feet to center field. that that used to be. But you still have Fenway Park, you still have the Green Monster, and you still have some things. But yeah, the fields, the stadiums, and just I think baseball saw the success of football because football guys in the 50s worked second jobs. They didn't make enough money to baseball guys worked second jobs, and in the 50s and 60s and probably the 70s. They worked winter jobs and did things. And but I think football fits so well because it fits so well into television, and where it's incredible the shots that they can get now, and you can see that sideline catch that I see guys when they keep their feet in bounds. That's incredible that they can show that a guy dragging his toes or something. It's just incredible. And back in my day, they didn't have that. The referee made the call and that was it, and that's what it was. So, but yeah, I think football fits so well into that as opposed to, I know hockey always has struggled with that because it doesn't fit as well as like football. Football is just incredible how well it fits into that. And I think baseball tried to follow some of the things that football presented, with the timeouts and with the appeals and so on that they have now, and the clock for the pitcher and the hitter and all those things. And I think many of the changes have been beneficial. I do. I think some we may have carried away maybe a little too far with the stolen base rules and things like that, holding runners on and limiting some of that. I think there you're in danger of really changing the game, a lot, changing it, when you change the game like that, and then you're going to change all the numbers in the games and the records of the games. But we've already done that, the records, that we went through during the home run age, with McGuire and all those things. But yeah, I still think it's a great game. I think youth sports are just great. I think I can go to my instructional school and I give instruction, and then there's a little dirt field right next door, and I go out and watch the girls 8 to 10 play softball, and parents are there and fans are there, and it's just that, and the kids are having fun,
Absolutely.
And I think with the big leaguers and in pro ball and college ball, you still got to leave room for that. As intense as it is, and of course all the monies that are involved now and so on. But if you're not having fun, and if you're not having fun as a scout, it's not a good job if you can't have fun doing it, because of the travel and the drive-through hamburgers and all those things, But no, it was a great career. I was very fortunate, and especially with the tie-in, when I would see kids from, I'm going to say our area, Rich, but that District 9 area, and back home in the Pennsylvania, Western PA area. I think that's great. I look at rosters and see if all the time, if I see somebody from, Clearfield or something like that, and I think, well, I know where that is,
Absolutely.
I know where DuBois is, or I know where Ridgeway is, and things like that. It's always nice to see that. And I always, once I know they're there, then I kind of follow that kid,
Sure.
So it's fun. It was a good career, but you can't lose that childhood and stuff. Because that's, growing up that way is a big influence. There's no doubt about it. The way that we were raised, and, the parents and brothers and sisters and school, and we didn't have travel teams back then, which is a big change,
It's a big change.
you went through what we called farm team, was right before Little League. It was farm team or Pee Wee League, and then you went to Little League. There was a Teener League, which was the same as Babe Ruth as far as the age groups, and then American Legion Ball, and so on. Well, now you have all the travel teams, different age groups. The travel from 12 to 14 is on this team. Potter McKean Little League All-Stars was a big deal, for me. Going to Gilt and then playing and playing at Countersport, which had a beautiful little league stadium at that time, and I'm sure they still do. But that was our travel ball. Was getting into, obviously, with the Williamsport World Series and all that.
Right.
My parents took me to the Little League World Series in 1968. I was in the crowd there. I got to tell you this real quick, Rich. I mean,
Sure.
real quick. At the 68 Little League World Series in Williamsport, Richmond, Virginia went to the finals, and they lost to a team from, and I believe it was Japan. They lost 1-0 in the finals. So I had the program, the team shots from the tournament, and and years later, I went down and saw. I'm going to look and see. I want to see if there was a big leaguer or somebody I knew. Well, Richmond, Virginia.
Yep.
Had a little second baseman by the name of Jim Pransky.
Jim Pransky.
And this is how baseball is. So you just can't lose ties, and you never do. Well, years later, Houston had a franchise here. I was working for Houston, and we had a system that once a year a scout could coach. If you had a background, that you could coach half a season in the summer, June, July, and August with a Class A club. Well, since we had the Houston's affiliate at that time was right here in the Quad Cities or in Davenport. So, and it made sense. I mean, I'm 3 miles away. And so I got to coach during that year. Well, our manager was Jim Pransky.
It's amazing.
So I took that program into the locker room one day, and I said, Panko, I said, would you sign this for? I felt kind of, silly getting autographs with a guy that you're, working with. But Panko, of course, signed it, and it was fun. And I have it. I still.
That's awesome, Jim. We could talk forever. I appreciate your time. I hope people get a chance to, number one, read your book and enjoy some of the things that I did. Great to have you on the podcast, Jim. And if you get back into Western Pennsylvania, look me up.
Oh, I really appreciate. This is so much fun for me to be on and talk. I really appreciate your diligence in putting this together, because I'm not the easiest guy to nail down sometimes, and I apologize for that. But it's really, you do a great job with these. This is a wonderful thing. You have to tell me how to watch this now. I mean, because this is so good and so neat, and your interest and love for the area and for the sports, I mean, really shows through. And I've been through several of these type of things before, and I mean, they're always enjoyable, but this one means a lot. It means a lot to me, and I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Appreciate it, man.
Take care.